The flowers started arriving every Friday at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon. Same delivery company. Same pale pink wrapping paper. Same white lilies mixed with soft roses Claire once described as elegant without trying too hard. And every single time, the card disappeared before I got home. At first, I honestly didn't think much about it. People send flowers for all kinds of reasons. Clients. Office celebrations. Friends. Claire worked as an interior designer now, and over the past few years she'd built the kind of professional life where gifts and deliveries weren't unusual. Still, something about those flowers slowly started bothering me. Not the flowers themselves. The secrecy. Every Friday evening, I'd walk into the kitchen and see the bouquet already arranged in a vase beside the sink. But the little card was always gone. Not laying nearby. Not folded into the trash. Gone. And every time I casually asked who sent them, Claire answered too quickly. Oh, just work stuff. Then she'd immediately change the subject before I could ask anything else. At 47 years old, I didn't think I was the kind of man who became paranoid easily. I owned a small custom furniture workshop downtown. Worked long hours. Built a stable life. Paid the mortgage. Raised our daughter. For most of my adult life, consistency felt more important to me than excitement. Claire used to love that about me. At least I thought she did. But over the past year, something inside our marriage had quietly shifted in ways I couldn't fully explain. Conversations became shorter. Dinner felt procedural. Some nights we spent entire meals talking only about schedules, bills, and our daughter's college applications. Then silence would slowly take over the table like a third person sitting between us. Claire started smiling at her phone in ways that no longer included me. Not dramatic changes. That's the dangerous part. Marriages rarely collapse all at once. Usually they erode silently through thousands of tiny emotional withdrawals nobody notices until the account is already empty. The Friday everything changed. I left work almost 2 hours early because one of our suppliers canceled a shipment unexpectedly. Rain drifted lightly across the streets while I drove home through slow afternoon traffic thinking mostly about cabinet orders and payroll schedules. Nothing felt unusual. Until I pulled onto our street and saw the flower delivery van parked outside our house again. For some reason, I didn't pull into the driveway immediately. I parked half a block away instead. Then I sat there quietly watching through the windshield while the driver carried another bouquet toward the front door. Claire opened it almost instantly. Like she'd been waiting for it. And then I saw something that made my stomach tighten. She smiled. Not politely. Not casually. The kind of smile people have when something reaches them emotionally before they even realize it's visible on their face. Intimate. Private. Important. The driver handed her the flowers and she looked down at the card before pressing it lightly against her chest for half a second. Then she glanced nervously down the street before stepping back inside. I don't know why I entered through the garage instead of the front door. Instinct, maybe. Or fear. The kitchen was empty when I walked in. The bouquet sat on the counter beside the sink. And for the first time in months, the card was still there. I stared at it for several long seconds without touching it. Because deep down, I think part of me already understood my life was about to divide itself into before and after. Finally, I picked it up. The handwriting was clean. Confident. Comfortable with intimacy. I still think about Friday mornings in your office. My hands went cold instantly. Not because the message was sexual. Because it wasn't. It sounded worse than that. Personal. Familiar. Established. Like this wasn't excitement anymore. It was emotional routine. Then I heard the front door close softly somewhere behind me. Claire's voice floated down the hallway. Michael? I quickly placed the card back exactly where I found it. A second later she walked into the kitchen carrying her purse. And the moment she saw me standing beside the flowers, something changed in her face so fast most people probably wouldn't have noticed it. Not guilt. Fear. And in that exact moment, before either of us said a single word, I realized Claire wasn't afraid I had discovered the flowers. She was afraid I had finally noticed her. Claire froze for only a second. But after 18 years of marriage, 1 second was enough. People think betrayal reveals itself through dramatic mistakes. It doesn't. Most of the time, it appears in tiny interruptions between expressions. A delayed smile. A tightened jaw. Eyes calculating too quickly before words arrive. Claire recovered almost immediately. "You're home early," she said softly. Too softly. Like she was already adjusting herself emotionally before I answered. "Supplier cancelled a shipment," I said calmly. Her eyes flicked once toward the flowers. Then toward the card. Still sitting exactly where I left it. For one strange second, neither of us moved. Then she crossed the kitchen quickly, picked up the card, and slipped it into her purse in one smooth motion. Too practiced to be accidental. I watched her quietly while rain tapped softly against the kitchen windows. "You never told me who keeps sending those," I said. Claire forced a small smile while arranging flowers inside the vase. "Oh, just someone from work." Someone. Not a client. A coworker. A friend. Someone. Interesting choice of word. I leaned casually against the counter. Must be important if they send flowers every Friday. That landed. I saw it immediately. Not panic. Pressure. Claire kept adjusting the flowers longer than necessary. Interior design projects can get weirdly personal sometimes. Another carefully built sentence. Technically reasonable. Emotionally empty. That's when I realized something unsettling. Claire wasn't improvising anymore. She already had explanations prepared. And people only prepare explanations for conversations they expect to have eventually. That night at dinner, I started noticing things I probably should have seen months ago. Not obvious things. Worse. Absence. Claire barely asked me questions anymore. She nodded while I talked without really hearing me. At one point, she smiled down at a message on her phone while I was literally sitting across from her discussing a problem at the workshop. She didn't even notice she was doing it. That part hurt strangely deep. Because distraction is often more painful than cruelty. Cruelty at least requires emotional engagement. Disinterest doesn't. Later that evening, after Claire fell asleep beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the dark. The flowers. The missing cards. The smile at the front door. The message. "Friday mornings in your office." Not. "I miss you." Not. "Last night." Routine. Emotional familiarity. Something established quietly over time while I apparently kept living inside an older version of our marriage. Around 1:30 in the morning, Claire's phone lit up briefly on the nightstand. One message. No name. Just. My chest tightened instantly. Claire shifted slightly in her sleep but didn't wake up. I stared at the glowing screen for several long seconds before finally reaching for the phone. Then stopped. Because deep down, I already knew something important. The worst part wasn't discovering another man. It was realizing my wife had slowly built an emotional life that no longer included me inside it. The next morning, Claire acted completely normal. Coffee. Breakfast. Weekend errands. Almost too normal. That's the strange thing about emotional betrayal. Sometimes the person leaving the relationship emotionally has already processed the loss long before the other person even realizes the marriage is dying. Around noon, Claire left for what she called a client consultation downtown. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I walked straight into the kitchen. Then opened the small drawer beside the refrigerator where Claire kept random household papers. Warranty receipts. Coupons. Takeout menus. And underneath them, 5 flower cards tied together with a pale ribbon. Carefully saved. I stared at the ribbon for a long time before touching it. Not because I was afraid of what the cards might say. Because deep down, I already understood something worse. People don't save things that mean nothing to them. The ribbon was pale blue. Carefully tied. Organized. Not hidden in panic. Preserved. My hands felt strangely numb as I untied it slowly and spread the cards across the kitchen table. Different flowers. Different weeks. Same handwriting. Clean. Confident. Comfortable with intimacy. The first card read. Still thinking about the hotel lobby conversation. You looked happier there than you have in years. Another. Friday mornings are becoming my favorite part of the week. Another. I miss hearing you laugh before meetings start. I sat down slowly at the kitchen table staring at the cards while afternoon rain drifted softly against the windows. None of the messages were explicit. That was the part making it feel unbearable. Because sex can be impulsive. But emotional intimacy takes time. Attention. Listening. Presence. Things marriages slowly stop noticing before they stop existing. Then I found the oldest card at the bottom of the stack. The paper looked slightly worn from being handled more than the others. Thank you for talking to me that day. I haven't felt understood like that in a very long time. That one hollowed me out completely. Because suddenly I understood this hadn't started as an affair. It started as emotional relief. And somehow that felt more dangerous. I leaned back in the kitchen chair and looked around the room slowly. The coffee mugs Claire picked out 15 years ago. The cabinet handles I installed myself. The tiny scratch near the sink where our daughter dropped a plate when she was 8. An entire life sitting quietly around me while I realized my marriage may have already ended emotionally long before I discovered the flowers. Then something else started bothering me. Friday mornings. Repeatedly. Not evenings. Not weekends. Mornings. Office. Routine. This wasn't stolen excitement squeezed into random moments. This was structured into her actual life. Something anticipated. Expected. Protected. I gathered the cards carefully and tied the ribbon back exactly the way I found it. Then returned everything to the drawer before Claire came home. Not because I was afraid of confrontation. Because I suddenly realized I didn't actually understand the situation yet. And emotionally confused people make reckless decisions. That evening Claire returned carrying shopping bags and smiling more than she had all week. The flowers were already arranged beside the sink. The cards hidden again. But now the entire kitchen felt different to me. Like I was standing inside a room where another invisible relationship had slowly been growing around me without my knowledge. Claire kissed my cheek while unpacking groceries. A normal gesture. Routine. But for the first time in our marriage, I caught myself wondering whether affection can continue out of habit long after emotional loyalty quietly leaves the room. At dinner, Claire talked about a new hotel project her design firm might take on downtown. I noticed her becoming animated for the first time in months. Her eyes brighter. Her voice alive again. Then her phone buzzed beside her plate. She looked down at the screen. And smiled before she could stop herself. Not dramatic. Small. Automatic. But real. She quickly locked the phone and continued talking like nothing happened. I don't think she realized I had finally started paying attention. And honestly, that hurt more than the flowers. Because it meant she no longer saw me as emotionally present enough to notice her disappearing. The next Friday, I left work early again. Not because I wanted more proof. Because once trust cracks, your mind starts searching for confirmation everywhere whether you want it to or not. Rain hung low over the city while I parked across the street from Claire's office building just before noon. For almost 20 minutes, nothing happened. Employees moved in and out through the glass lobby doors carrying coffee cups and phones. Traffic crawled slowly through wet intersections. A delivery truck blocked half the street while construction workers shouted somewhere farther down the block. Everything looked painfully ordinary. Then Claire appeared. She stepped out of the building wearing the dark gray coat I bought her 3 Christmases ago. And for one dangerous second, seeing her there almost made me feel ridiculous for even being suspicious. She looked normal. Familiar. Like my wife. Then a man walked out behind her. Tall. Early 40s. Navy overcoat. Holding 2 coffees. He handed one to Claire automatically. Not flirtatiously. Comfortably. Like they'd done it enough times to stop thinking about it. Claire smiled at him immediately. And there it was again. That smile. The one I hadn't seen directed at me in months. Not dramatic. Not sexual. Worse. Emotionally effortless. The two of them started walking together beneath the rain without noticing me parked across the street. No touching. No kissing. No obvious affair behavior. That somehow made it feel even more intimate. Because secrecy built around emotional familiarity always looks quieter than passion. I watched Claire laughing at something he said while they crossed toward a small cafe near the corner. And suddenly I realized something painful. I couldn't remember the last time she laughed like that with me. Not polite laughter. Not distracted listening. Real presence. I stayed inside the truck while rain rolled slowly down the windshield watching them through blurred glass. They sat near the cafe window. Talking. Leaning slightly toward each other. At one point, Claire looked down while he spoke and smiled in that soft unconscious way people do when they feel emotionally understood. That moment hurt more than the flowers. Because flowers can be romantic gestures. But emotional safety is something people build slowly. Then I noticed something else. Claire was talking with her hands again. Tiny expressive movements she used to make constantly during the first years of our marriage. I hadn't seen her do that in years. Not with me. And suddenly an ugly realization settled quietly into my chest. Maybe I hadn't only stopped noticing Claire. Maybe Claire had stopped feeling visible with me a long time ago. The thought made me feel sick immediately. Because now this wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was grief. Grief for a marriage that may have been emotionally dying long before either of us admitted it. After almost 40 minutes, Claire checked her watch and stood up quickly. The man smiled at her while saying something I couldn't hear through the rain-streaked glass. Then Claire did something that hollowed me out completely. She reached up and adjusted his tie gently before stepping back. Such a small gesture. But deeply intimate. Not passion. Care. Routine care. The kind people develop after paying close attention to someone for a long time. I looked away immediately after that. Not because I was angry. Because suddenly I felt like I was watching private emotional territory where I no longer belonged. I drove home before Claire left the cafe. Not because I'd seen enough. Because I finally understood something terrifying. This wasn't an affair built on excitement. It was a relationship quietly replacing emotional spaces inside my marriage one Friday at a time. That evening, Claire came home carrying another bouquet. Same flowers. Same wrapping paper. Same missing card. But now I noticed something else too. She looked lighter after those Friday meetings. More alive. Like parts of her personality I thought had disappeared years ago somehow still existed. Just not with me anymore. At dinner, she asked about the workshop for the first time in weeks. Too casually. How was your day? I looked at her for several seconds before answering. Normal question. Normal marriage. Normal evening. Except suddenly every ordinary moment between us felt staged over something neither of us was brave enough to acknowledge yet. Later that night, after Claire fell asleep, I sat alone in the kitchen staring at the flowers beside the sink while rain tapped softly against the dark windows. Then I finally admitted something to myself I'd been avoiding ever since reading the first card. I wasn't losing my wife to another man. I was losing her to a version of herself that no longer existed when she was with me. The following Tuesday, Claire forgot her laptop at home. That almost never happened. She called me around noon sounding distracted. Can you bring it to the office? I have a presentation in 20 minutes. Of course. Normal husband. Normal favor. Normal marriage. At least from the outside. Rain had finally stopped by the time I parked outside her office building downtown. The lobby smelled like coffee and polished stone while employees moved quickly between elevators carrying portfolios and phones. Claire texted me the floor number. When the elevator doors opened, I immediately heard her voice somewhere down the hallway. Laughing. Not polite office laughter. Real laughter. Warm. Uncontrolled. Alive. I slowed down without meaning to. Then I saw them through the glass conference room wall. Claire and Adrian sat beside each other reviewing design layout spread across the table. He was saying something quietly while Claire leaned toward him smiling in that same unconscious way I'd seen at the cafe. Comfort. Ease. Familiarity. And suddenly I realized something painful. I had spent months trying to understand whether my wife was having an affair, while completely ignoring the fact that she had already become emotionally happier somewhere else. Claire noticed me first. Her entire expression shifted instantly the moment our eyes met through the glass. Not guilt. Adjustment. Like she mentally stepped out of one version of herself and back into another in less than a second. She stood quickly and walked into the hallway. You made good time, she said softly. I handed her the laptop. Up close, I noticed something else too. Claire looked younger around him. Not physically. Emotionally. Like parts of her personality I thought life had worn down were somehow still alive beneath the version of her I lived beside every day. Thanks, she said quietly while taking the bag from me. Behind the glass wall, Adrian glanced toward us briefly. Then politely looked away. Interesting. Because guilty people usually avoid eye contact completely. But Adrian looked calm. Almost respectful. That unsettled me more than arrogance would have. Claire tucked hair behind her ear nervously. You didn't have to bring it yourself. It's fine, I said calmly. For a second neither of us spoke. Then she said something small that somehow hurt more than the flowers ever had. Things have just been busy lately. Busy. Such a harmless word. People use it constantly while relationships quietly die underneath it. I looked past her into the conference room. Design boards. Fabric samples. Coffee cups. Adrian organizing papers while listening to someone else speak. He looked completely woven into her daily life. Routine. Expected. Present. Not fantasy. And suddenly the cards made perfect sense. Friday mornings in your office. This wasn't escape. It was companionship. Claire noticed me staring toward the room. Then she lowered her voice slightly. Michael. That tone. Soft. Careful. Already preparing for emotional damage control. I looked back at her. And for the first time since all this started, I asked the question directly. Are you in love with him? The hallway went completely silent. Claire's face changed instantly. Not outrage. Not denial. Pain. And somehow that answer felt worse than hearing yes. She looked down briefly before speaking. I didn't mean for this to happen. There it was. Not. Nothing's happening. Not. You're imagining things. Just. I didn't mean for this to happen. A quiet confession disguised as explanation. My chest felt strangely hollow standing there beneath fluorescent office lights while strangers walked past us pretending not to notice the conversation. How long? I asked quietly. Claire closed her eyes for a second before answering. I don't know when it started exactly. That told me everything. Because people usually remember the beginning of physical affairs. But emotional attachment grows slowly enough that by the time you notice it, part of you is already gone. I nodded once. Calmly. Then stepped back toward the elevator. Claire looked frightened suddenly. Not frightened of divorce. Frightened because she realized I was no longer asking questions trying to save the marriage. I was finally seeing it clearly. Claire came home late that evening. Not unusually late. Just late enough that I noticed every minute. By the time I heard her car pull into the driveway, the house was dark except for the kitchen light above the sink. The flowers still sat there. Perfectly arranged. Perfectly alive. I had started hating them quietly. Claire stepped inside carrying her purse and froze slightly when she saw me sitting alone at the kitchen table. Not because she was surprised I was awake. Because something in my face must have looked different now. Calmer. That's the strange thing about grief. After enough pain, emotion sometimes stops looking emotional at all. You're still up, she said softly. I nodded once. We need to talk. The words landed immediately between us. Claire closed the front door slowly behind her but didn't move farther into the kitchen. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Rain started again outside, tapping lightly against the windows while the refrigerator hummed quietly in the background. Normal sounds. Meanwhile our marriage sat collapsing silently in the middle of the room. Finally Claire placed her purse down carefully and sat across from me at the table. Not beside me. Across. Distance already becoming physical. I looked at her for a long moment before speaking. I met him today. Claire's face drained of color instantly. Not dramatic panic. Something sadder. Relief. Like part of her had become exhausted from carrying two emotional realities at the same time. I didn't plan for you to find out like this, she whispered. That sentence hurt more than anger would have. Because it confirmed something painful. She had imagined me finding out eventually. Which meant somewhere deep down, she already knew this relationship had crossed emotional lines long ago. How long have you been gone? I asked quietly. Claire frowned slightly. Gone? Emotionally. I didn't say the word out loud. I didn't need to. Claire looked down at her hands resting on the table. And suddenly she looked older than she had earlier at the office. Smaller too. Not because she stopped loving Adrian. Because now she finally had to look directly at the damage instead of quietly escaping it every Friday morning. I don't know, she admitted softly. Honest answer. Terrible answer. I leaned back slowly in the chair. Was there ever a point where you were going to tell me? Claire rubbed one hand across her forehead. At first it was nothing. Of course. That's how almost every emotional betrayal begins. Not with sex. Not with plans to destroy a marriage. Just attention arriving somewhere loneliness already existed. He listened to me, she said quietly. There it was. Not. He was exciting. Not. He was attractive. Listened. And suddenly I realized something brutal. I had spent years believing stability was the same thing as emotional presence. Provide. Work. Pay bills. Stay loyal. Meanwhile, Claire slowly disappeared emotionally beside me while I kept assuming consistency automatically meant connection. I wasn't trying to replace you, she whispered. I looked at her carefully after that. Because strangely enough, I believed her. That was the horrifying part. I don't think Claire consciously woke up one day wanting another relationship. I think she slowly became emotionally alive somewhere else while our marriage quietly turned procedural. Schedules. Mortgage payments. College applications. Laundry. Work. Two people functioning efficiently beside each other while intimacy slowly starved to death underneath routine. Claire's eyes filled suddenly. I still care about you. Care. Interesting word. People use it when love becomes too complicated to define honestly anymore. I looked toward the flowers beside the sink. Then finally asked the question sitting inside my chest ever since I found the first card. Do you love him? Claire closed her eyes immediately. That answer hurt more than any spoken word could have. When she finally looked back at me, her expression had changed completely. No more explanations. No more careful language. Just grief. Yes, she whispered. The kitchen went completely silent after that. Rain slid softly down the dark windows while 18 years of marriage rearranged itself permanently between us. And sitting there across from my wife at the kitchen table we once picked out together, I realized something devastating. Sometimes relationships don't end because two people stop loving each other at the same time. Sometimes one person leaves emotionally so slowly. The other doesn't notice the marriage is already gone until they're standing alone inside it. And sometimes clarity is the moment relationships quietly stop being reparable. Claire moved into the guest room 2 days later. Not because we officially decided to separate. Because after certain conversations, people instinctively stop pretending normal life still fits correctly around them anymore. The house changed quickly after that. Not dramatically. Quietly. 2 coffee mugs instead of 1 in the morning. Separate grocery trips. Separate evenings spent in different rooms. Even the silence between us felt different now. Not tense. Final. Our daughter Emma noticed first. Children always do. She came home from college that weekend and stood in the kitchen staring between us while Claire quietly folded laundry at the counter and I pretended to read invoices at the table. Nobody had argued. Nobody was shouting. That probably made it easier to understand. Emma looked at Claire first. What's going on? Claire froze slightly. Then looked at me. Interesting. Because suddenly neither of us wanted responsibility for saying the truth out loud first. Finally I closed the folder in front of me and answered calmly. Your mother and I are having some problems. Emma stared at us for several long seconds. Then asked the question neither of us was prepared for. Is there someone else? The room went completely silent. Claire lowered her eyes immediately. And Emma understood everything. That fast. Children notice emotional fractures long before adults think they do. Emma looked devastated. Not loud. Not angry. Worse. Disappointed. I can't believe this, she whispered. Claire stepped forward immediately. Emma. But Emma backed away before Claire could touch her. That hurt Claire visibly. Good. Because for the first time since all this started, somebody else was finally reacting to the situation emotionally instead of carefully managing it. Emma looked at me next. And somehow her expression hurt even more. Not pity. Protection. Like suddenly she saw me as someone emotionally wounded. Parents spend their whole lives trying to shield their children from pain. There's something deeply humiliating about watching your child realize they now need to emotionally protect you instead. That evening Emma stayed in the kitchen with me while Claire sat alone upstairs in the guest room. Rain rolled softly across the windows while Emma stirred untouched tea beside me. Finally she asked quietly. "When did you know?" Interesting question. Not. When did it start? When did you know? I stared down into my coffee for several seconds before answering. The flowers. Emma frowned slightly. What flowers? And suddenly I realized something strange. The flowers had become so emotionally consuming inside my own mind that I forgot nobody else even knew they existed. So I told her everything. The Friday deliveries. The missing cards. The saved messages. The cafe. Emma listened silently without interrupting once. When I finally finished, she looked toward the staircase leading upstairs. Then said something painfully simple. She stopped looking happy here a long time ago. That landed hard. Because it was true. And deep down, I think I had known it too. I just kept believing consistency would somehow protect us from emotional distance if I worked hard enough and stayed loyal enough. But stability without emotional presence eventually starts feeling lonely to the person living inside it. Emma reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "Dad, this isn't your fault." I almost corrected her immediately. Because part of it was my fault. Not the betrayal. But the blindness. I had spent years treating love like maintenance instead of connection. Provide. Fix problems. Pay bills. Stay dependable. Meanwhile Claire slowly stopped feeling emotionally seen beside me while I kept assuming marriage could survive indefinitely on routine. Upstairs, I heard the guest room door close softly. Emma heard it too. Then she looked back at me carefully. What happens now? I glanced around the kitchen slowly. The flowers still sat beside the sink. Beginning to wilt finally. Soft petals curling inward at the edges. And somehow that felt painfully appropriate. I think, I said quietly, your mother left this marriage emotionally long before either of us admitted it. Rain tapped softly against the dark windows while Emma sat silently beside me at the kitchen table. And for the first time since all this started, I stopped thinking about revenge entirely. Because revenge only matters when someone steals love from you suddenly. This was different. This was watching love slowly disappear, one unnoticed emotional absence at a time, until eventually all that remained was routine pretending to still be intimacy. Claire told Adrian about the separation before she told most of our friends. I found that out accidentally 3 weeks later. Not because she confessed it. Because people start rearranging loyalties quietly once relationships become publicly fragile. That Saturday afternoon, Emma convinced me to go with her to a local art fundraiser downtown. You need to leave the house for once, she said. She wasn't wrong. The workshop. The kitchen. The silence. My entire life had started shrinking into routines designed mostly to avoid thinking. The fundraiser took place inside a renovated industrial building filled with soft jazz music, wine glasses, and people discussing abstract paintings like they personally understood suffering better than everyone else in the room. Emma disappeared almost immediately after spotting friends from college. I stayed near the back wall pretending to study a large canvas covered almost entirely in gray paint. Then I heard Claire laughing somewhere behind me. Not the office laugh. Not the careful polite version from recent months. Real laughter. Alive again. I turned slowly. And there she was across the room beside Adrian. Not hiding. Not secretive. Just existing beside him naturally. Like they had already emotionally crossed into public territory while I was still trying to process the collapse of private one. Claire noticed me almost immediately. The smile disappeared from her face at once. Adrian followed her eyes toward me and straightened slightly. For a second, none of us moved. Then Claire walked toward me slowly. Not guilty. Nervous. How long have you been here? She asked quietly. Long enough. Behind her, Adrian remained near the wine table pretending not to watch us. But I noticed something strange immediately. He looked uncomfortable. Not defensive. Not possessive. Ashamed. Interesting. Because for the first time since all this started, I suddenly realized Adrian probably never saw himself as someone destroying a marriage. He probably saw himself as someone emotionally rescuing a lonely woman. That didn't excuse anything. But it made the situation feel painfully human instead of villainous. Claire crossed her arms lightly. I didn't know Emma invited you. Another strange sentence. Not. I'm sorry. Not. This is difficult. Just. I didn't expect your presence here. That hurt more than I expected. Because suddenly I realized how completely we had shifted emotionally. Once upon a time, Claire automatically imagined me beside her in every room. Now my presence required adjustment. Emma walked back over then and immediately froze after seeing Adrian. The entire situation became awkward instantly. Claire looked emotionally exhausted. Emma looked furious. Adrian looked trapped. And I just felt tired. Deeply tired. Emma looked directly at her mother. So this is him? Claire closed her eyes briefly. Emma. No, Emma said quietly. Dad sat in that house for weeks blaming himself while you were already out doing this publicly. Several people nearby glanced toward us before quickly pretending not to listen. Claire's face flushed immediately. Adrian stepped forward carefully. I never wanted to hurt your family. Emma laughed once. Cold. Then maybe you shouldn't have joined it halfway through. That landed hard enough, even I felt it. Claire looked genuinely shaken now. And suddenly I understood something important. Affairs often survive emotionally while hidden because fantasy protects them from consequences. Reality changes the atmosphere completely. Real rooms. Real children. Real damage. No more Friday flowers. Now it looked exactly like what it was. Loss. Emma grabbed her coat angrily. I'm leaving. Then she looked at me. You coming? I glanced once toward Claire. For the first time in months, she actually looked afraid of losing something real. Not comfort. Family. But strangely enough, I no longer felt desperate to repair that fear for her. That chapter inside me had finally gone quiet. I nodded toward Emma. Yeah. We walked toward the exit together while rain hammered softly against the high warehouse windows. Right before reaching the doors, I looked back once. Claire still stood there beside Adrian in the middle of the crowded gallery. But suddenly they didn't look romantic anymore. They just looked like two people standing inside the consequences of choices that finally became visible to everyone else. And walking out into the cold night beside my daughter, I realized something painful. Sometimes the real end of a marriage isn't discovering betrayal. It's the moment you stop hoping the person who hurt you will become who they used to be again. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. No dramatic courtroom battle. No screaming arguments. No revenge. Just signatures. Paperwork. Quiet endings. By then, the flowers had already stopped arriving on Fridays. At first, I noticed their absence constantly. Then gradually, I stopped looking for them. That surprised me more than anything else. Because for months, those flowers had felt like symbols of everything I lost. But eventually I realized something important. The flowers weren't what destroyed my marriage. Silence did. The slow kind. The kind that grows quietly between two people while they continue paying bills, discussing schedules, and pretending routine still counts as emotional connection. Emma moved back home temporarily after graduation while figuring out work and apartments. The house felt different with her there. Warmer. More honest somehow. One evening we sat together in the kitchen eating takeout while rain tapped softly against the windows like it had almost every week since this entire story began. Emma looked at me carefully across the table. "You seem calmer lately." I thought about that for a moment. Then nodded slightly. I think I finally stopped trying to understand how it happened. Because honestly, that had been exhausting me most. Not losing Claire. Trying to find the exact moment we stopped truly seeing each other. But relationships rarely die in one moment. Usually they disappear slowly through emotional neglect both people notice too late. A few days later, Claire called unexpectedly. The moment her name appeared on my phone, something strange happened. For the first time in months. My chest didn't tighten. I answered calmly. Her voice sounded softer than I remembered. "How are you?" Such a small question. But it carried grief now instead of politeness. "I'm okay." Silence settled between us for several seconds. Then Claire quietly admitted something I think she'd been carrying for a long time. "I don't think I realized how lonely our marriage had become until someone started listening to me again." Honest. Painfully honest. I stared out the kitchen window while headlights slid across wet pavement outside. "You should have told me before it got that far," I said quietly. "I know." And strangely enough, this time those words didn't make me angry anymore. Because she was right. She knew. We both did. We just kept surviving beside each other instead of confronting what was disappearing between us. Claire exhaled softly on the other end of the line. "I never wanted to become someone who hurt you." I closed my eyes briefly after that. Because deep down, I believed her. That was the tragedy of it all. This wasn't a story about monsters. Just two people who slowly stopped reaching each other emotionally until somebody else arrived in the silence between them. Before hanging up, Claire said something that stayed with me long after the call ended. "You were always dependable, Michael." Dependable. For years, I thought that word meant safe. Strong. Good husband. But after everything that happened, I finally understood something painful. Dependability can hold a life together, while emotional absence quietly empties it from the inside. Later that night, I stood alone in the kitchen staring at the empty space beside the sink where the flowers used to sit every Friday afternoon. And for the first time since all this began, the emptiness didn't hurt anymore. It just felt honest. I switched off the kitchen light and stood there for a moment listening to rain against the dark windows. Then I finally admitted something to myself that took almost an entire year to understand. The most painful part wasn't losing Claire. It was realizing we had both become so emotionally lonely inside our marriage that silence eventually started feeling normal. And maybe that's how most relationships actually end. Not through screaming. Not through one terrible mistake. But through years of slowly stopping making each other feel emotionally seen. Thank you for listening. Calm justice doesn't shout. It keeps records. And before you go, tell me honestly. Do relationships usually end because of betrayal? Or because two people slowly stop reaching each other long before anyone notices the distance?